From WFRV Local 5, your local election headquarters. This is Newsmaker Sunday.
Good morning and thank you for joining us for Newsmaker Sunday. I'm Tom Zalaski. Well, the general election is just over 2 months away, and while all eyes are on Wisconsin as a swing state in the presidential race, we've got some races here in the state that are also important. A state race we're keeping an eye on is the Assembly District 54 contest. Former Oshkosh Mayor Lori Palmieri is wrapping up her first term with a re-election bid against Republican challenger Tim Patterson, and we welcome the incumbent this morning, State Representative Lori Palmieri, here with us. Thanks again for joining us. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
You are headed into a run for a second term. Your general assessment of your first term, was it what you expected? Any surprises?
You know, it was what I expected and so much more. Yeah. Some of the surprises were, you know, the volume of bills that we went through last session. Okay. Some of the exciting pieces were getting to know some of my colleagues, both on our side of the aisle and the other side of the aisle. And that was a surprising thing for me, is that there is work being done together. There's much improvement that could be that could come into that as well.
Big difference between your duties as mayor and your duties as state rep.
Yes.
How does that differ? How has your life differed?
Well, certainly the travel schedule is something to be managed, but big difference being that we have so many state agencies to get to know, because aside from working on legislation, obviously our offices also do a lot with constituent services, and many times we're trying to help people navigate through some of those agencies. So that was really a wonderful opportunity for having an even deeper involvement and connection with constituents.
Oshkosh knows you very well,
Yes.
obviously, but you're running in a much wider area now. So
True.
for those who aren't as familiar with Lori Palmieri, the Lori Palmieri resume.
Yes.
Who are you? Where have you been? Where'd you come from?
So yes, I am what I call myself is a grandmother with grit. And now I can add to that, I am a veto protector, an equal rights defender, and certainly a champion for the folks in the 54th. And as I've had the opportunity to serve in city council for, 6 years on the council, 2 terms as mayor, certainly many boards and commissions, not just in Oshkosh, but in the region, with a background in urban planning, I come to this with a very deep policy focus.
You have that background in urban planning.
Correct.
How did that play? Did it help you in your role as mayor and now in your role as state representative?
Yes, very much so, because when it comes down to it, our zoning, our housing, our streets, our infrastructure, our economies, all of those things play an integral part in people's daily lives.
You worked with the East Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission.
Yes.
Big, impressive title. For those not familiar with that body, what does it do? What's its purpose?
Sure. Well, first of all, I started there as an intern, a non-traditional student intern, in 2009, and I was working on things like transportation, safe routes to schools, looking at rail, looking at, our regional connections with many of the transportation pieces, as well as things like our housing stock and other elements. And at that time, I think it was like 12 counties. It kind of ebbs and flows in the number of counties. Yeah. But as a commissioner, I certainly had that privilege to be part of, shaping some of that work plan for the greater region.
You also played a role in co-founding the Village Neighborhood Association.
Yes, Middle Village Neighborhood Association.
And you played a role there. What did you bring to the table? What did that organization do?
So yes, as co-founder of the Middle Village Neighborhood Association back in 2010, I got a lot of experience in neighborhood organizing around things beyond basic like neighborhood watch, looking at things like property conditions and advocating for budget applications and allocations in our central city neighborhood. And that was kind of the infancy of a greater movement towards organizing neighbors to get more connected.
And so do you still have your hands in that, or have your
Not
state
as
reps?
much, but we certainly still help maintain the neighborhood garden that came out of that, some of the green spaces, and just connecting neighbors.
We have much more to come with Lori Palmieri, so please stay right there. Back now with State Representative Lori Palmieri, running for a re-election bid in the State Assembly District 54 local government experience starting in 2016, Oshkosh Common Council, 2 terms as Oshkosh Mayor. Did you accomplish everything you were hoping to accomplish in that role, or did you leave some stuff behind?
There were a few things that didn't quite make it over the hump, because you always get a few things that come in that you weren't anticipating. But certainly Oshkosh is now a hot spot for jobs, for industry, for folks, young folks moving in. Lots of building going on. We still have a lot of housing that we need to address.
How has all your efforts on the local level helped you on the state level?
Well, certainly as we would go along in local government, there were often times where we had maybe some obstacles or barriers, based on statutes or legislation. So bringing that to the table and trying to improve those areas at the state level, because those things don't just impact Oshkosh, right, or our district, but they're statewide concerns.
Do you now have a more sympathetic ear to local officials, to
Yes,
local mayors?
I am very connected with our local council, and we frequently have things that overlap. And I was just tuning in actually last week to one of their meetings and heard about something that was of concern that we could address at the state level, and we're pursuing that.
So you got involved in public service back in 2016, as we said, Common Council, Oshkosh Mayor. What was the trigger? You probably had a pretty nice life going. You didn't need the headaches of politics. What was the trigger that got you involved in all of this?
Really, at that time, and I still live in the central city, it was about basic needs and basic things that were needed to be addressed in our downtown, our central city, and what I saw to be some inequities, and advocating to try and, in a at-large format, you have council members that are representing the entire city. And so I had the opportunity, we worked together as a neighborhood to try and bring attention to what we felt was kind of a forgotten area, just outside the university area. And it was an opportunity for neighbors to connect and work on things together.
What were you most proud of as you look back on the Oshkosh stint?
I would say I'm most proud of the fact that with our boards and commissions, I had the opportunity to appoint folks to boards and commissions that had previously never served, who had so many different backgrounds. And that brought a different perspective to many of our policy initiatives.
What is happening in Madison as far as Republican, Democrat loggerheads and the infighting and the gavel in and the gavel out? What do you see as the biggest roadblock down there? Is it simply a matter of numbers? We have more numbers than you, and so we do it our way?
That seems to have been what presented itself over my first session. I got excited about the fact that we did have people that wanted to work together on both sides of the aisle on some things, and there wasn't necessarily a lot of coverage over those items. We did pass some bipartisan issues, but really the restriction and the stranglehold on the committees that hearings needed to get through to make it to the floor. So kind of that agenda gatekeeping is what was really very frustrating. We had a bill that made it through 95% of the hoops that just had a little further to go, and it didn't get that second hearing where it needed to, and it was related to something that is a bipartisan issue. Elderly living in assisted living needing fall recovery support. I had a Republican working on that, leading on their side, and it was really, like I said, most frustrating to see that we just couldn't always get those hearings that needed to put things over the final. But we would have scads and scads of bills that would come that were just ridiculous. Some things that would come that were already on the books, and they were just kind of like messaging type things. But I do think there's a will, and I do believe that with these new maps, we are going to see more bipartisan work.
Something you mentioned earlier in the show, and you just mentioned it again. Is there a misperception of this stalemate? I mean, certain issues get all the headlines and the loggerhead headlines, but is there a lot of stuff being accomplished down there that we don't necessarily hear about or read about?
Yes, there are. And they may not, address those bigger issues, and those are being chipped away at on those bigger issues. But some of those smaller things that make a big difference in people's lives are getting passed, and there's not always a lot of coverage on those things. Is it enough? Absolutely not. We have to address some of the basic needs in working Wisconsin.
Lori Palmieri is our guest running for re-election, and we have much more to come with her, so please stay right there. We are back now with State Representative Lori Palmieri, who is running for her second term as State Representative. You've got the several committee assignments in Madison. Let me run past some of the committees you're on. First, the Committee on Environment. What's the committee working on, and why did you want to become a part of that?
Sure. So yes, I'm on environment. I'm on forestry, park and rec, mental health and substance abuse prevention, and alcohol prevention, as well as the regulatory and licensing. I wanted to be on the environmental committee because one of the things that I knew was going to be big and was already coming to have some work done it was PFAS and lead in our water. And so a lot of activity around PFAS, a lot of activity around lead. However, we have much more to do with that committee. Forestry, Park and Rec had a lot of emphasis on recreational things. Certainly our state parks are something we all treasure. So those two were a real passion of mine. Unfortunately, going back to hearings and committee meetings, mental health and substance and alcohol abuse only held 2 hearings in the last session. Now that is unacceptable because we know that there's much more needed to be addressed in that particular area, impacting real people's lives.
Why do you think that happened? Only 2 hearings?
I would say that was a leadership decision. Unfortunately, many of the items that the governor had in his budget were removed, and there just was not movement forward in that committee.
So what's the rub? Who doesn't want to help people with mental issues?
Right, that's a really good question. I mean, we all value our health, and certainly mental health and our physical health parity is something that we all need to be productive and for Wisconsin to move forward. It's a very good question as to why that would not be a priority. The
Committee on Regulatory Licensing Reform. Why are you working on that, and why does the average viewer, average constituent, care about that work?
Sure.
How does it affect them?
So it's quite vital because there are over 200 professions that the state issues licenses for, professional licensing. And that particular committee, unfortunately, has had a lot of focus on eliminating regulation. And when folks are trying to get their license, whether you're a nurse or a social worker or a nail technician or whatever, you have to go through that agency. And that agency has been very limited and been stripped of some of the staffing and allocations by the other side of the aisle because they would like to eliminate much of that regulation. We want Wisconsinites to be safe. We want to make sure we have high quality standards for these professions in the state of Wisconsin. So it's a very vital part of people's everyday lives.
You are also on the Speaker's Task Force on AI.
Yes.
Something you never thought you'd be a part of.
I did not.
How do you stay ahead of something that's changing literally by the week?
Certainly. And with the Speaker's Task Force on AI, that was a bipartisan group that came together. We held 4 hearings across the state to hear what was on people's minds. And what should we be looking at in terms of the risks, and what should we be looking at in terms of the opportunities? And we heard much. And I was especially interested from the healthcare side of it, like how would healthcare be impacted with AI? And I came to learn through these hearings and through research, we've already had AI involved in much of our healthcare, but there are a lot of opportunities there. But we want to have some guardrails too, right? We want folks to be safe in the process, and we want oversight. Your question, how do we keep ahead of something that is just evolving so rapidly? It may be a little tricky to regulate things that are kind of already out of the gate.
Right.
But there were recommendations that came out of that. And then there's also the governor's task force on AI. So two different things, right? But they are supposed to work together. We came out of that with some protections, or at least some disclosure requirements. In the political world, in my estimation, what should have passed would have included everyone, protecting them from things like deep fakes and giving disclosure to any product or service that you would expect to have a human involved with, where AI is doing that.
Sure. We are back to wrap up with Lori Palmieri, running for state representative, second term. After this, stay with us. Back now with State Representative Lori Palmieri, running another term for the State Assembly District 54. Your campaign website, you list several issues that are important to you. Let me address a few of those. First one, fair wages and taxes. What's the issue there? What's the problem there?
So certainly that income equality piece of things, I mean, we need to have obviously fair wages, living wages. I mean, oftentimes you're getting questions about, oh, we should have a minimum wage of like $15 an hour. We didn't get that passed, and now we're at a point where, at least in my region, you really can't survive on anything less than $18 an hour, considering the increase in, affordable housing or our food or gas and childcare, right? But you need to have those living wages. You need to have the fair taxes. Folks at the higher end paying their fair share, so that everyone else in the middle isn't squeezed so tight.
An issue you just mentioned, affordable housing. What can you do about that on the state level?
Well, again, we did pass a small package addressing affordable workforce housing. It needs revised, it needs improved, it needs beefed up. The affordable housing piece of it, in our region, we've seen increases that have been really quite surprising in the last few years. But because we have a smaller amount of housing stock and much of that is aging, we have to make room for folks coming in. When we bring in new jobs or we bring in new business, those folks have to have a place to live. And our teachers, our nurses, our law enforcement, they need to have something that's accessible and affordable for them as well. Another
issue you tackle is clean environment. We all think we're in Wisconsin. We're in God's country. We have a clean environment. What are you dealing with there?
Well, when I came to Wisconsin over 25 years ago, I was just completely fell in love with, our resources here, the natural resources. In recent years, and learning more about what we're facing in terms of our water and our land use, I mean, it is not acceptable in 2024 for us to have a level of PFAS or lead in our water that impacts Wisconsinites.
And your public school stance.
Yes.
I mean, everybody wants strong public schools.
Yes.
What are you particularly aiming for?
Well, here's the way I look at it. No child, no young person should have their strong public education dictated by the zip code that they live in. And we look at a strong, we can't just say K through 12 anymore. It's pre-K through 12 and beyond into higher ed. And so we know that a strong public education is one of the critical elements of addressing poverty. And I believe in our district, we're looking at like a little bit like 16% or so who are in that federal poverty bracket. And so strong public education is the answer to that.
In your view, what's the biggest issue facing Wisconsin?
With regard to education?
With regard to anything for the state of Wisconsin.
For the state of Wisconsin,
the state legislature.
The most basic piece of legislation that has to be addressed comprehensively is addressing our housing shortage right now, because that is the basis for everything else.
All right, Lori Palmieri wants to get reelected to the 54th Assembly District. Your pitch, madam, as to why you should be returned to the legislature.
Well, over the last 2 years, I would say that my efforts at making relationships and understanding where we are in the future of the next seven generations for Wisconsin, we have to focus on basics. Basic shelter, basic health care, basic food for all, access to reproductive freedom. That is critical. A clean environment, as well as a strong public education, and income equality and justice, bargaining rights, things of that nature. And finally, a strong, sustainable resource management plan for those future generations. If we are to sustain and grow as a state, we've got to focus on how we manage those elements.
Lori Palmieri, our guest this morning, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Much
I'm
appreciated.
Very glad to be here.
And if you have a newsmaker in your town who you think we should have on the program, let us know about it. Send us an email to tips@wearegreenbay.com, or you can message us on Facebook. And be sure to join us once again Sunday morning at 7:30. Until then, have a great day.